Welcome back to the Kingfisher Podcast with Eric and Bron Whitley. Thanks for joining us again for another episode of the podcast. We're having a great time with this.
Yeah, we're continuing our story with Leah and Chris. So thank you for being here, guys. We really appreciate it. And we've been talking about how Leah was part of a cult as a child. She was raised in a satanic cult and a victim of satanic ritual abuse.
Yeah, and we're getting to tell this story really as a testimony of God's goodness. In the first couple of episodes, we've talked about the background and sort of all of that, and now we're on our third episode to look at what God started to do, because we've come to this point where we're aware of the abuse and aware kind of the history in the past. Like, enough stuff has come out, and now we're starting to walk into what God started to do in Leah's life.
Yeah, and you were telling us, Leah, that you were having some experiences of the demonic.
Yes, we, at that point where we'd had a pastor come into our house and pray, really broke open a lot in our lives because it had been challenged. The darkness had never really been challenged prior to that to any level. So once it was outrightly challenged and exposed, then it didn't really have to hide. I don't think it felt a need to hide anymore. So it was pretty free to just do what it wanted. So there would be times I would be, just moving around the house or in the kitchen or whatever, and I was aware of its presence, like I had been aware of it when I was, younger and pre-marriage. Like I was aware of it standing a presence in my apartment. Now it was much more obvious, and probably a stronger presence, if I could say. It's like there was this awareness that it was there, but it was almost like it was there more physically. Like when I was younger and it was present, it was like more of a shadow or a dark figure, whereas now it was almost like I could feel it, like Chris was standing beside me. It was there, right there, and obvious enough that I could interact with it and have a conversation, but wouldn't always respond to me. And that became, once again, our new normal. Our children became more aware of what was happening in the house as far as the demonic activity was more present in a bigger way.
Was anybody else aware of the guardian's presence, or was it mostly you, and then everybody else kind of was like, just doesn't feel right in here, or that kind of thing?
The guardian himself was mainly me, but as far as things moving around the house, the kids were very aware. And even as our daughter got a little bit older and became more vocal, she would speak of a black dog at our front door.
Oh, wow. In the front yard. Yeah.
We didn't have a black dog. We didn't have any dog.
And there wasn't a black dog in the street.
Yeah, in fact, there was no dog there. She'd talk about it and she'd be like, look at that big black dog. That big black dog doesn't look happy. And we would go and have a look and there was nothing there. You couldn't see it, but she would clearly describe this spirit in our front yard watching over our house. So things like...
And it wasn't happy. It wasn't happy.
Yeah, and she would say, mad, daddy, mad, meaning the dog was mad. So that kind of thing just became much more a part of our lives, really.
So we went through several times where one of our children would see a figure in the backyard, and the younger one, she would see that same figure, and it was in different places, and it was in our backyard. And so then I would pray and anoint the backyard, so then it wasn't in the backyard, but it was now on the fence. And so then we anointed the fence, and then it was above the fence, it was in the sky. So it was just this almost not cat and mouse, but it was just
persistent. It was just very persistent,
and almost mocking, no matter what you do, I'm always going to be here, you can't get rid of me. This particular one, the children described they've talked about the other ones being, black and black fingernails and black eyes and everything, whereas this one was white.
And that's because it was a different demonic character that had been played out in my story as a child. So it was very much its own identity, which is why the children saw it differently.
Can you take us back now to what happened in your childhood that you became aware of as this all progressed?
Now, remember, this has been a story over. It took 11 years for me to be free from that world, and people go, "Well, 11 years. What were you doing wrong in that time?" And recovery shouldn't take that long, but it was 11 years of trying to figure out what my story was, because we were coming from nothing. And 11 years of trying to find help, like of trying to get the right people at the right time who had some understanding and could talk us through and navigate what we were facing.
And we had a lot of promises. Leah will talk about 11 years, but almost from the get-go, I wouldn't say, we were seeking out help, counselling. Like Leah had issues with like either reacting to me or getting angry or upset, and she's, I don't understand what's happening. So we would start a process of seeing a counsellor, and at some point in the journey with them, we would encounter a brick wall, and she couldn't progress any further.
Just so much frustration. Like we knew there were issues.
A lot of false starts, and even once we started, like before our involvement with Pastor Eric, just so many different, like all, I'm sure well-intentioned people, but we had every kind of response from medicate her and
put her in hospital,
like go start another life, with you and the children, people telling her direct, you never, ever, ever tell your story.
But at the same time, well, this is obviously your fault. Like,
yes,
what have you done? Because you profess to be a Christian. What have you done? And even after the countless pages and 3 hours of prayer ministry where you had to do the checklist and confess and pray everything through that, there was still stuff there that wasn't addressed, and that was blamed on me, even though I'd come completely raw, completely vulnerable, had been as honest as I possibly could. Still, it was my fault that there was no breakthrough because I was told I had unconfessed sin. Well, I had unconfessed sin because I had no idea what had happened in my childhood.
So can you take us back to your childhood?
Well, I like to explain it. I know people say, well, it's an onion. Like, life is like an onion. I say it's like a cabbage because, an onion, it's like each section is one whole section. One
layer is all intact.
Yeah, it's all just on its own.
Separate from every other layer.
Whereas when you have a look at a cabbage and you peel one cabbage leaf back, then one cabbage leaf, as you peel it back, lifts up the next cabbage leaf.
And it's all folded in and almost intertwined.
Yeah. So as you deal with one, you're already preparing to deal with the next one until you get to the heart of the cabbage, which for me was the deepest, darkest depths of darkness, was the core issue and what we had to deal with. So it was 11 years of gradually peeling back one leaf at a time. And I mean, Eric, you can attest to that, is we would go, when we eventually got to you after going through a number of other people and making contact with you, is it was a gradual process of we would deal with one issue and God would really speak to us about that, would give some idea of what was coming, would give Bible verses according to that, would really speak to all of us about what was happening. We would then come in with you, take hours dealing with that, and then God would give us a rest. It's like each cabbage leaf for each stage, we needed a rest because it was so traumatic and so hard to process. Like it just was so difficult. And I think that 11 years was for that reason because the trauma was so bad.
Yeah.
And also because people don't do this. Counsellors don't do this. Psychologists don't do this. Pastors don't do this.
You've had psychologists even say to you, no, I'm not going to treat you.
Yeah, we've had psychologists and counsellors say, no, we're not going to work with you. We had one Christian psychologist say, I don't want to, and because I'd given him a bit of a heads up, look, I think this was partly way through my journey. This is what it is. I need help. I want to be a whole person. And he just flat out said, I don't want to know. We're not going to deal with the root cause. Let's just treat your symptoms so you can live, basically. And this was a Christian psychologist. We had one counsellor who had worked with a survivor previously who we went and shared our story, and he just basically went, yeah, I'm not doing that again. Like he just, which I understand.
Sure.
You know, Eric, you can attest to, it's a long, hard journey.
It's a big commitment. And, you know, I think about it, and as I often refer to the people that I minister to as clients, it's just an easy way to talk about it. And as a client, you have always been so determined, and so I've actually used you as an example to a lot of other clients and saying, well, okay, if you really want to get through this, you've got to commit to it. Because I remember we'd have our sessions. You would go home and journal and pray and write. Like, so whatever kind of boundary we hit, you know, maybe it was a belief you were holding on to, you would just go and pore over the Bible and work on that on your own outside of the ministry room. Mm. And then, yes, you would come back, and those sessions, particularly in those early days, they were hard sessions. And we kind of have a funny sense of humor about the whole thing. I used to know if you would show up in sunglasses, I knew it was going to be a rough day. I knew it was going to be a hard day. Oh, she's got the sunnies on. All right, we're in trouble today.
Or carrying my blanket.
Yeah, there was always the blanket. And even in those moments, even where sometimes it felt like you were pushing back and going, I don't want to do this, or you just didn't have it in you, you still made effort. Like, you made effort. And I have to commend you for that, because myself, like, Bron, you can attest to this. Like, I don't even like going and asking for help when I have stuff. You know, like I'd be a terrible client for somebody. I'd be terrible.
Yeah.
And and so, because I just don't want to be that vulnerable, and I don't want to face the rawness.
It's hard to do. It's hard for anyone to do.
To face that brokenness. But I have to commend you and say, even in those worst days, you always push through it. Now, sometimes, you know, we didn't make much progress, but sometimes we made a lot of progress. Mm. And you know, as you're saying, over this long journey, I think God knows the time frame. Now, God's time frames are never the ones that we want. And I think if he just snapped his fingers and everything was fixed, I think it almost becomes more detrimental than this very impatient, long process that we had to journey on. But yet that was the right way, because it built strength. So it's kind of like this tearing down.
And it was the journey of healing. It's a whole journey. It's not just, if God had just healed you instantly, you would never have worked through all of those things. Yeah. So in order for it to not have a hold on you any longer and for you to be free, you had to work through it and face it, unfortunately.
Yeah, and definitely I think that's probably one of the best parts of the journey has been I was forced to push into Jesus, because I didn't have, there were long sections I didn't have anybody else. And, you know, there were times, even though you and Eric were there were times Eric was just burnt out. I mean, it was hard. And I respected that, and I saw that, because it just is a really tough fight. So, you know, there were times I had Jesus. You know, there was even times where Chris was just like, I don't know that I can do this anymore. Yeah. So there were times that I did feel very alone, even in that. And God was all I had.
Yeah.
You know, so I really had to lean on him. And at the time that didn't feel great, but oh my goodness, like I would never want to change that, because the relationship I've developed with him, the intimacy I've developed with him, because I'll say to people now, they'll ask me a question, I'll go, yeah, I just sat with God and I asked, and this is what he said. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, you mean you wait for his answer and he talks to you? I said, doesn't he talk to you? Like, you know, it's like.
He does.
Yeah, but it's like some people just.
It is a very
foreign to them.
Concept, yes,
yeah.
Whereas that was my lifeline. Like my relationship with Jesus was my lifeline. Probably the biggest part of the journey that has been so hard is approaching people for help, because here you have somebody who suffered extreme trauma, and as you hear the story, like the loss of value, the loss of self-worth, and you have somebody who's been through that extreme trauma and then has to be raw and vulnerable and share with people.
And they could reject you, and they could turn away from you.
And most of the times they did.
Like blame you.
Counselors,
It's
psychologists,
your fault. You brought it upon yourself.
Prayer ministers, pastors, all put it back on you and lay some kind of blame. Or we had one pastor's wife said, because God always said to me, let them see, was the big thing when I said to him, I don't want to I don't want to talk to somebody about this. I don't want to talk about the struggle, like the desire to hurt myself or the memories I have or any of that. I don't want to say it. I don't want to have to be that raw. And God was always, let them see. And I'm like, I don't want to. He's like, no, I need you to let them see. I need you to let them hear what it is that you have to say. I need you to be honest with that. Let them see the path. Just give them the opportunity. And that's what we did. And there were times we were so broken and wounded from letting them see that we would have to kind of remuster and regather ourselves and go, do we really want to do that again? Because that's just so painful, because there is constant rejection and abandonment and judgment, just so much judgment.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the hardest parts of the journey is I never chose that life.
Yeah.
I never chose Satan. I never chose to grow up in the occult. It was something I was born into and something I had to face, but that was never my choice. And yet I was always treated like it was.
Yeah.
I was always treated like, well, that was my choice. You have this demonic stuff because that's your choice. Or whatever the consequences were, that's on you. And I think that's probably one of the hardest parts of the journey is you constantly place yourself out there just desperate for help. And you get it thrown back in your face or you get blamed or judged for that. And it was through no fault of your own. But you just are so desperate for healing and freedom and so desperate for wholeness. You keep on doing it over and over and over again, and it just is so hard.
I have to laugh, though, when you're talking about, because I haven't heard you say that before about God telling you to let them see, because it's so funny. Like a lot of what I do prophetically, so as a prophetic person in those giftings, I cultivated a lot of that ministering to you. And it's so funny because God let me see, like quite clearly, like we would often be talking about a situation, something that had happened, and then God would bring me into the room. Like I know the memory would be there for you, and I could come into that room. God would show me this in my spirit and in my mind, to the point of going, oh, there's a table over there. And you're like, yep. And there's this over here. Yep. And like he would show me that stuff. And that was kind of one of the breakthroughs why we worked well together, I think, because this is a partnership. This is not me in charge leading the whole thing. This was definitely a partnership between us to find your freedom. And again, I'm not somebody who knew everything at all. I was just willing. I just committed to it and I was willing.
And I would agree. There were some days it's like you didn't know, but that was always that, that's where we did work together. And in some ways it was fun because we would enter into the room and we would just be so reliant on God. Yeah. And there were days where we'd look at each other and we'd look at Chris and we'd be like, like, we don't know. Let's just pray and wait and see what the Holy Spirit does. And it was very...
Because I think this is one of those things where, I've learned and I've taught and I've trained people. There are inner healing methodologies. If you go see a psychologist, they have methodologies, like they follow certain protocol and certain processes for different things that someone's experiencing. There's no protocol for this. There's no process that you can follow and go, well, if we do this and this and this, we get the outcome. Today it worked. Next time, that's not going to work. You got to come up with a whole new process the next time.
Yeah. So before we get into the ministry and the way that you found freedom, let's dive into your story.
Sure. Well, once we were at that point where the demonic was just being so active in our life, we needed help. Like I didn't have a choice. I was on the edge of suicide. My memory was so patchy. We had, like Chris said, we had one anaphylactic child and we had another child with severe allergies at the time. So really 2 severely allergic children. There were days I'd walk in the kitchen, I couldn't remember what my kids ate. So I couldn't really remember what they were allergic to. I would just be completely blank because of this internal struggle within me. So we gradually started meeting with our first pastor, and as we started going through that process, in much the same way you said, Eric, God let you see, I think there were times there for the few brief times we met with them, God let him see, because there were times where I would see something and I could tell by his reaction he was seeing exactly the same thing. What I like about that is it gives credibility to my journey, because so often people go, well, that can't be true. Well, there's no way that happened. Because Chris often explains it. He says what you've been through, it's kind of like you were trained to be a child soldier and a child prostitute at the same time. And when you kind of say it like that, people go, well, how? Like, you're raised in Australia, how could that be? But that was very much the case, because what we learned as we went through, and this was through memories returning, this was through me spending time with God showing me visions of stuff. So this is through all of this process. So gradually as we went through, what we found out was previously in the podcast we had said that my older sister had been dedicated to Satan. But when she approached our parents had said, oh, well, that was a friend. A friend had done that. And she believed them, and it was never really discussed again. And yet when we started my process, it became really obvious that our parents were involved. And even though we had been raised in churches our whole childhood, it was actually a front for the occult. And quite a number of the people in those churches across the Pentecostal, across the Brethren Church were involved and played a part in the occult behind the scenes. So what we came to learn was my mother was actually a high priestess in the occult, and my father was aware of this and played his part. But it was once again that thing when we were younger of what was normal, is it was open knowledge that my grandfather had a curse placed on him by some Italian gypsy, which had to be broken way back when. So, yeah, like there was all of this leading into...
It was like spiritual bloodlines, kind of like Game of Thrones, like the
which we don't watch.
The daughter of this house and the son of this house, and they get married, and the son brings in this. And I mean, that's true in Christian marriages. You bring... you're both bringing stuff in, but in this case, like, it caused this conflagration of this negative spiritual.
Yeah, so both parents were very much involved, but my mother had a high position as a high priestess in the occult, and I had been trained to take her place in that position. And people have asked since, who've kind of heard my story, have said, well, why you? Like, what was it about you? Because I was the fifth child in line. My older sister really, I think, who was 7 years older than me, was the experiment. She was the beginning. She was kind of the introduction. And somebody had also said that my family had a curse over the oldest daughter in the family. So that would have made sense as well. But so she was dedicated to Satan, but that was all. And I mean, I say that was all, but that's pretty horrific, is as a toddler to have that happen.
She still lives with the effects of that to this day.
Yeah. So
she has distinct personalities, and like she, has had children and is, been active in church for several decades, and they've found a life, made a life, lived a life, and still are living a life. But she is not free.
And so you mentioned that you were the fifth child. Is there, like, I know quite a bit about the occult, and sometimes numbers are important and all. Is there anything important about being the fifth child in line that you think you were dedicated?
Yeah, I don't think it was about being the fifth child. I think it was because I was a twin. I was never told as a child that I was a twin. There were times I remember as a child feeling like I was and questioning. And, have you ever heard of that phantom twin syndrome, where it's like you or the missing twin? Like there's Facebook groups and research done into it, where if you were a twin and you've lost the other twin, you still feel like there's this component missing. And I had that a number of times in my childhood, but just brushed it off like that's me being silly.
Sure.
What would I know?
But that becomes actually a really important element of this, because we know the occult, for whatever reason, twins are an important part, that they tend to favor using twins as part of that. And we even know in the Nazi concentration camps, they were doing a lot of occult kind of things. And you can read about Jewish families, and the twins survived the Holocaust, but it was because they were twins. They would kill off the rest of their family, but they would take the twins because they were doing these occult things with the twins. And so I don't know what it is, but there's something about being a twin. And so that's a really important sort of part of that story, I think.
Sure. I think it's probably because of the connection that you have from the womb with a twin. Like there's this emotional connection and this, like the spiritual connection definitely as well. But, you know, all of the different experiments that you see, all the papers written on twins and how what's done to one, the other tells you, or one picks a shape and they haven't seen each other, but the other one picks exactly the same shape. There's this connection between them from the womb.
Yeah.
Or even ones like that were separated at birth, and one will get appendicitis and go into surgery, and the other twin on the other side of the world or on the other side of the country, they may not necessarily get appendicitis, but they will show the same symptoms. And like twins, female twins that are separated when at birth or like don't know each other, or even the ones that do, when one gets pregnant and goes into labour, the other one won't be pregnant, but she will go through the labour process.
Like the pains.
Yeah, the pains and all of the symptoms and the feelings and everything like that, and still be totally separated.
And I remember when we were getting married, I was handed this photo of me. I was told it was me. I was blonde when I was young.
We're doing a collage for the wedding.
For the wedding
reception.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'd been handed this photo, and there was this cute little blonde toddler on a bike, you know, those kind of push bikes. And behind her was my brother, who was a year older than me, in our old house. And I looked at this picture and they went, "Oh, look, it's you." I said, "That's not me. Who is that?" "No, that's you." And I knew to the depth of my soul, without a shadow of a doubt, it wasn't me. And this little girl looked about 2. And I just went, "That's not me." But I was absolutely they swore black and blue, "This is you, this is you, this is your older brother, this is you." And I just knew that photo was not me. Like I never ended up using it because it
didn't feel
it wasn't
right.
me.
Yeah.
So as we went through, we had learnt that I was a twin, my mother was involved, and we learnt all of this because I had started to remember, and we had started to work with the multiple personalities, with the alters that actually had memory of what had happened. And what we came to learn was my mother had had 2 babies, identical twin girls, and she had kept one, and she had named her Leah, and she had given the other one away to the occult. So in essence, had given one away to die, to be raised by someone else. Early on, I thought my mother kept me. And I mean, it was obvious at that stage that doctors were involved at the hospital. So this is a coordinated network. It's not accidental. It's very planned, and it's very secretive, and it's very well coordinated.
And this is what I think a lot of people push back and go, "There's no way all these people are involved." But my experience, and like you're not the only person I've ministered to who's had these experiences, and they all have very similar stories. And if you want to go onto the internet and start researching this stuff, you will hear very similar stuff to what you're sharing right now. Yes, it does boggle the imagination because we sort of feel like we live in one world, and then if you start to talk about this stuff, it shatters our perceptions of reality in some ways. But my experience has been that these things are happening, and so I'm saying this as an endorsement of it, to say these things are happening, whether you want to believe it or not. There is networks, and it is not, this is not the rogue one guy somewhere doing stuff in the room by himself. There are networks of people, very powerful people, very wealthy people, that are able to bring this stuff together. It does. I mean, it sounds like Jason Bourne or these crazy worlds that we're not aware of. And that's what it is. There are worlds that we're not aware of, and it's very hidden, and it's very well organized. And so, yes, it feels hard to go, that can't be true, and to believe it. But actually, these things are happening.
And I think that's where people struggle to accept it and hear it and believe it, because it gives you a sense of things aren't safe, or there's stuff going on that I'm not aware of. It's so premeditated is, I think the word for it is, it's not a one-off, it's not sudden. This is so calculated and goes for such a long period of time because, like I said, I'm sure my mother was born into it, which is why I was born into it, and you can go, well, how do you know the doctors were involved? Well, it couldn't have happened unless they were. And I know the hospital was involved because I have very vivid memories of being tortured in an old, sorry, I might get a bit teary, there was an old surgical ward of this particular hospital that had been shut down. And I only found this out later after I'd started to remember and started to work through this process of piecing my childhood together. There was an old surgical ward that had been cut down, and because with satanic ritual abuse, there's so much there's so much psychological stuff happening there to break you, to create the multiple personalities and for them to be able to control you. So there's all this psychological stuff happening. And I remember this particular time where there was torture involved in an old surgical ward. So I know people at the hospital were involved, and I knew that they got rid of the sacrificial remains in the hospital incinerator. How would I know that?
Yeah.
It's like I've never worked in a hospital. How would I know that that's how they got rid of the remains after sacrifices?
Because those are the kind of questions rational people ask. They go, well, how do you get rid of the bodies? And how do you cover this up? And how come the police never find out? And how, they go through all those questions, which are legitimate questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's very organized and intentional, and they cover those bases really well.
They do, and which is why it stayed a secret for so long, and probably why so many people and certain people were able to be involved. So through that process, I had always believed that my twin had been given away to the occult to be raised. But as we went further into my recovery and I started to regain some memories, what we realised was I was the other twin. So Leah was actually, sorry, I'm going to get a bit teary again. Leah was my twin sister, and my parents had chosen to keep her and gave me away to die, really, because I have memories as a very young child being with someone else, and I have memories of I didn't even really have a bed. It was more like I had a box. So I slept in a box in a dark room, and these people would come in to feed me. And that's probably the earliest memory that I have. And then what happened was when my twin and I were 3, is they went through this process of dedicating me to the devil. But what was meant to happen, I believe, was what my mother was told would happen. I would be sacrificed. She could keep Leah, and Leah would be raised to take her place as the high priestess. But being what they are in the satanic world and the occult it's all mind games, and it's all manipulation and all control. So what they did was they switched us. And I believe one of the reasons they did that was to control my mother and have a hand over her, to manipulate, to have kind of leverage against her. But also I remember being tested, like they had tested both Leah and I to perform certain tasks. And, because I was a twin, I believe that gave us both giftings that were valuable. So they tested both of us, and I had the gifts that were a little bit stronger. I remember, certain tests like placing my hands over a glass dome and being able to read stuff off the dome. And I think part of it too was, like you said, there was this persistence and this resilience in my journey. And I think that was probably part of it too. Not that I was the stronger person than her in the sense that, well, I was the better person. It's that as they tried to break me and split me into multiple personalities, I still fought back. So as they broke the plate and broke the plate and broke the plate, I didn't give in to that. I kept on fighting. And therefore that made me more valuable to them because they could do more damage and use my gifts to a greater degree.
Yes, I have read that they prefer someone who's harder to break. If you break too easy, then they see that as not as valuable, weakness, whatever. They want somebody who is hard to break.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing.
Yeah.
I fought harder, I think. And so what happened on the day was my parents had brought my sister thinking that I would be sacrificed and she would be dedicated. And instead what they did in front of them was they, with their knowledge, because we were identical, with their knowledge, they traded places. So what they did was they first sacrificed her in front of me at 3 years old. And people go, well, that can't be true. That's so horrific. And yet I can tell you in great detail, because that was when my first dominant altar was created, was I think the altar that protected me my whole life and held my core identity was created right at that point. So I can tell you in clear detail how it looked, how it felt, what people were wearing, the texture of the clothing, the colour of the clothing, exactly what they did to her to kill her. And how would I know that if I had never, I don't watch horror movies. I've never watched horror movies. I can't handle them. I've never read articles on Satanism because they are a huge trigger, especially back then were a huge trigger for me. How would I know that if it had never happened? And for my memory to be so crisp and clear. And then what they did was they actually used her blood and dedicated me in her place. So I have a really clear memory of my mother. After that had all happened, my mother had picked me up and I was covered in blood and had put me in a sink. And I can describe in detail the sink and how it looked. And I remember standing there in this sink and my mother was holding this tap, this hose thing over the top of me to wash me off. And I remember looking in her face and I just wanted her to look at me. I just wanted to connect with her. And she just was so cold, I think probably just in shock, because they had just done the bait and switch with her. That was never the way it was meant to be. She always thought she would take Leah home, and that was the daughter she was connected to, whereas what she got was me, and she had watched her child she had raised for 3 years die. So I remember just trying to connect with her in some way, and it's like she was just really disconnected. And that was probably one of her altars. She probably was operating out of a place of her brokenness. And if I asked her, she would probably not even remember that. But I clearly remember looking at her face. And so after that time, and through all of this process, I had known, and this was years of discovery. Yeah. I'm not Leah. And
because we've had this discussion as we've come kind of more to the end of your journey, those were some of the questions that we were having during our ministry sessions, because you were just going, do I keep this name that's not really my name? Because you know the other name, and we can talk about it if you want, but you know the other name, and should I go by that name? Because that was actually my name from birth, but now I've been given Leah as my name. And of course, there's all the consequences of that. You've got to go around and explain to everybody, I'm a grown woman and I've been called this for, the last however many years. And now I want you to call me this. Like everybody goes, what are you thinking? This is crazy.
Yeah. And I'm okay to say it. My real name is Annie. I was given that by the occult. And people go, well, how do you know that? You're a twin. There's evidence of it. There's a birth certificate. There's a death certificate. I said, no, that's not how this works. I don't exist on paper. I was the child that was given away to die. My parents, the birth certificate was written for one child because the other child was never meant to live. In the occult, that was the intention. So I have no birth certificate, and there is no death certificate for Leah, because what happened was I was given to the occult. They named me Annie, and I did talk for a long time about changing my name, but then I just sat with God one day after we had reached the end of my healing journey in that sense. And I was just like, what do we do? I don't know what to do here. And he showed me, that movie Annie about the adopted girl?
Little Orphan Annie.
Yeah. Well, that's actually originally from a poem called Orphaned Annie. And it's very, very, very old. And God just showed me really clearly that's why I was named Annie, because the poem was actually about this servant girl who saw the darkness, the demons coming.
Wow.
And that's where I'm like, okay, well, I don't want that name. I don't want to go by Annie because I don't want to be named by the occult for that reason. So what happened was the day my sister died, because we were identical, my parents were then given me. I was dedicated to Satan, went through that whole process. They were given me to take home. This 3-year-old who'd never lived with them, who had been so brutally traumatized, was put in a family that I wasn't a part of. So I've always had a sense of this, I don't fit here. And my mother never loved me. My mother just was so disconnected my entire life. Like, we just never, she felt nothing for me. And now I know why. I know why that is. She never chose me. She was just stuck with me because I was the child she was given, and there was this expectation that I was her next in line because I was a twin, because of my gifting. And, you know, there was training in that. I remember, you know, being taught to speak in demonic tongues and to be able to curse and cast spells. I remember those things. I was taught how to kill, like how to sacrifice. It started with baby goats. I was taught how to kill them as a child, and I have no memory of any of this until I did. And when I started remembering, and when my alters, my other personalities, started to share with so much detail about my childhood, Chris actually said one day, "You've never made sense to me, but now you do." Because there was all these details of me and my life that finally pieced together. So I then lived with my family. My mother behind the scenes continued to train me up to do what she did. And in that, I'm aware of people who were involved and places. And this is the thing, how would I know places and locations and things like that? How would I know that stuff if it wasn't true?
Yeah. And we also do find, like, when you're working with the disassociative parts, like, I don't know if it was with you or if it was another client, but there are times where there's a certain ceremony or a certain traumatic experience and you're shattered, and one part has the memory of what it looked like. One part has the memory of how it sounds. It's almost split into your senses. One remembers how it felt. One remembers another part of that. And so it's very hard sometimes to piece those things back together unless you have this kind of almost like a conference meeting with all of them and they can start to share, because it, as I say, one has the sight of it, but the other 4 can't see anything. So they've only heard it, or they've only felt it, or they've only tasted it, or smelled it, or whatever it may be. I don't know if that was you. I don't know if that was you.
No, for me it was a little bit different. I actually had different personalities, different alters at different stages. So it's almost like each trauma, they were able to give it in detail at whatever age it happened, or whatever that specific trauma was. And, you know, I actually even remember one day, we were quite a few years into my journey, and it's like my alters would gather and I wasn't invited.
Have a party without you.
That's what it was like. It's like I would walk into the room within myself. It's like I'd walked into a room and they were having a conversation, but I wasn't invited to it. And there were times where they would be having a chat, and when I realized, and I was like, what's going on? They would just all go quiet. And I remember when we hadn't quite known that I was Annie at this stage, but we had kind of suspected what was happening. And one of those situations happened where I clearly remember I walked out into our lounge room and the kids were all off playing somewhere else. So things were quiet briefly, and I walked into the lounge room and I could hear all these voices speaking. And I heard one of them talk about Annie. And I went, "Hey guys, who's Annie?" And they just kind of, it's like, you know, when you interrupt a conversation and everybody leaves the room. That's what it was like. It's like they all left the room. And I think a big part of that is I had so many personalities attached to so much specific trauma, but I had one very specific personality who really saved my life, in the sense that she was the one that when I witnessed my sister being killed, she, at that stage, that personality was created, and she took my core identity, the one that was raised as Annie. She took that core identity and she hid it away and was personally in charge of that. Looking after Annie was her core purpose. And then all of the other personalities were kind of created after her and around her. And even to the very end of my journey, which she was part of, like she was...
I remember her well, yes.
Yeah, she was like my dearest friend in one way. And any of the work that we had to do in prayer ministry, you had to go through her.
Yes, I did.
There were times you wanted to talk to one of the other personalities and she wouldn't let you if you were going to mess around with stuff or get too close to the truth. And I remember at one stage in prayer ministry, Jesus gathered all the personalities together in one space because he wanted to address all of them at once. And she wouldn't let us through to Annie. She actually hid her and kept her away. And we were aware that Annie was there. But this particular personality was like, nope, that's a no-go zone. Do what you have to do, but you're not touching this one. And that went through right to the very end where we had dealt with all of the other personalities and helped them to merge. So the pieces of the plate were coming together.
Yeah.
And Jesus had brought healing to that part of my life and dealt with that trauma. And it was right up to the very end where she finally, after years of seeing Jesus and hearing him speak to the other altars and give them freedom, that she went, it's okay, I will let you see. And at that stage was when she actually stepped away and released Annie as my core identity so that we could go, okay, this is now, we can do this now. This is the final piece of the plate. And
yeah, that was a long process. And you know, as well, it was building rapport with this one and getting her to trust me as well as trust Jesus, because I was kind of the one introducing Jesus and trying to express who he was and teach her about his faithfulness and goodness and all that. And, you know, early on, wasn't having a bar of it, but as we went through and I guess sort of realize, okay, this dude's not going away. Like I've offended him, I've tortured him and been mean to him and everything else.
She was dirty at you some days. She did not want to talk to you at all.
And then it's funny, and I guess people listening probably think, you guys are talking about one person but multiple people, and you kind of have to get your head around that when you're working with disassociation. Is you're looking at the same person, but you might be talking to 5 different people and all, and so you kind of have to be able to switch on the fly and realize, I know this person as Leah, but I'm talking to this other person who has a whole different sort of set of agendas and ideas and personality in a lot of ways, responsibilities. And
she very much ran the show. And at first we thought that was a threat, but what it was is she coordinated the whole team of personalities, really. I remember there were times even where you were going to address one personality and she shut you down and went, nope, if you want to talk, you talk to me, because there was too much evidence in what the other personality, or she thought the other personality was too vulnerable and was going to give it up, really. So, you know, there were days she very much shut you down and was like, nope. And she stepped to the front and there was no budging and we couldn't get past her. So for her, it really was, she was the fighter, I think, which is why she's the one who was created when I was 3. She's the fighter. She's the one who went, this is how it's going to work from here. I'm in charge. I'm protecting her. And so if you were messing with that, she really, you know, was challenged. And, you know, you did build a relationship of trust with her, and she learnt to listen to you, and she learnt that you could be relied upon. And, you know, that was a process that took years, to the point where I'm going to get teary again. For the very final day where my plate was made whole and Annie, that core identity, who I was able to be released, and I could be me for the first time in my whole life, saying you thanked her and said, you know, that she was free to go, and we appreciated the job she had done, because she had, you know, I don't think people realize when you have multiple personalities, like even the specialist that we had worked with briefly with you, she had said to me fairly early on, you don't even realize you're switching, do you? And I said, what do you mean? She said, your different personalities, your different alters are stepping in and out depending on how you're responding to me. I said, no, I'm not. She says, I'm watching you. And I think that's why we did so well, Chris and I, for so long, is my personalities knew what to do. Like, they had free range to manage. If I was in challenging situations, if I felt threatened, they stepped in and I didn't have to do anything. Like they reacted and they ran the show. And, you know, she really did as the orchestrator of all of them, and therefore why she was the last one to merge and finish the plate. Once they had all merged and it was just her, there was this sense of loss because she had managed so much of my life and my core identity only operated through her, and I owed her my life. Like that personality, it's almost like she was her own person because she had protected Annie, the heart of Annie, for so long.
Yeah.
And kept me really protected in all of that. She had almost created other altars to run the show to protect my core identity. So when we got to her as the very last piece of the puzzle and saying goodbye, there was such a sense of loss and grief because
I think I was even crying that day. I think, as I recall.
It was hard.
Yeah, it was. It was like losing a friend. It really was.
And for Annie, for me now, for me at that point when we had finished that session and we just knew this was it, God had said it was done. You know, this is now the new, all of my personalities were together, and Annie had stepped forward at that as that little 3-year-old identity that needed to grow and merge. Even for Annie, there was such a sense of almost abandonment by that personality. It's like she had functioned through that personality for so long. Even in our prayer ministry sessions for all those years, Annie had navigated almost from behind the skirts of that personality. It's like she had, that personality had hidden her and wouldn't let her be seen until she knew it was safe for Annie to come out.
Yeah.
So there was almost this sense of abandonment that personality had left me and I was alone. So there was there was excitement about the end. I mean, 11 years is a long time to be free and to be whole. In the absence and in that final excitement of this is it, we're done, there was a lot of grief.
Yeah. Well, I think we might leave it there, and we're going to take a little break, and then we'll come back, and there'll be probably one last episode that we can kind of wrap this up. Now that we've sort of gotten to this point and Annie's there and the healing has happened, be sure to tune in next time to hear a bit of the conclusion of this or hear how the story continues. Thank you so much for listening to the Kingfisher Podcast with Eric and Bron Whitley. We're really blessed by all of our listeners and really appreciate taking the time to tune in and listen. Be sure to listen again next week to hear the conclusion of this amazing testimony, an amazing story of what God has done. We pray you have a blessed day.